Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman, and I'm so glad you're here. If you are new to this channel and interested in being part of the solution to our education crisis, I hope you'll subscribe to be notified when I make new content. Please also like and share this broadcast so others can benefit from the information we're about to share. Each of these broadcasts is an opportunity to hear from people who are working to improve education any way they can, wide variety of different ways they do it. And this one is no exception. Stephen Hicks is a professor of philosophy at Rockford University, Illinois. He's the executive director of the Center for Ethics and Entrepreneurship and a senior scholar at the Atlas Society. He has written 6 books. I would list them all for you, but I'm only going to mention the most recent one because it is on my list to read. My husband just finished reading it and said it's one of his favorite books ever, and that is Explaining Postmodernism, Skepticism and Socialism from Rousseau to Foucault. And I would highly recommend that per my husband. Like I said, it's on my list. I have a pretty big stack of books to read. His writings have been translated into 17 languages. He's published in academic journals such as Business Ethics Quarterly, Teaching Philosophy, and Review of Metaphysics, as well as other publications such as the Wall Street Journal and Cato Unbound. He's in 2010, he won his university's Excellence in Teaching Award. He's been a visiting professor of business ethics at Georgetown University, visiting professor at, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure, Jagiellonian University in Poland, visiting fellow at the Social Philosophy and Policy Center in Bowling Green, Ohio, visiting fellow at Harris Manchester College and Oxford University in England, senior fellow at the Objectivist Center in New York, and visiting professor at the University of Kasimir the Great in Poland. And I have asked him here today to talk to us about the ideological capture of our colleges and universities specifically. I have several questions for him along those lines. And I think that he is well positioned after I just read that bio to you to answer them. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Stephen Hicks to the broadcast. Hello.
Hi, Deb. Thanks for having me back.
And thank you for being here. I forgot to mention that you were here once before, and I will make sure that I link to the other program because it's evergreen content. So as I mentioned to the audience, I've asked you here to talk about illiberalism on college and university campuses. What prompted me to ask you is a blog article that you wrote not that long ago. I think it was maybe a little over a month ago. Entitled Ideological Capture of Universities in China, Russia, and America, the Same Illiberal Pattern. And I found that fascinating because my audience has a tendency to believe that China and Russia or one or the other are trying to take over America or trying to, assert their, hegemony or whatever, that somehow they're not teaching these bad illiberal ideas in their schools so that they'll be better positioned. And I don't have the background you have, but I don't believe that. I never believed that. Help us out. What's really going on?
Well, illiberalism is a broad tent, and so there's lots of reasons why people might be opposed to liberalism. This is small L liberalism. It's also using the label philosophically, take seriously liberty and freedom and preparing individuals to be free in their thinking and capable of being free citizens.
Right.
So when we look internationally, we do realize that any conception of liberal education is quite foreign. It's a relatively recent phenomenon, mostly in Western Europe, and then spreading to North America and other parts of the world. And that the longest history of education has been illiberal education in that sense, where you have the teacher or the professor, and this person is the authority who basically has all of the answers, or the textbook has all of the answers. And the job of the student is more or less passively to receive all of those answers, regurgitate in the approved form. You do not question the teacher. You don't question the textbook, and you are molded. So there's a doctrine, and the doctrine is put in you. So it is indoctrination in that in the literal sense. So in the early modern world, though, the idea of liberal education came to the fore, where it was part and parcel of early modern philosophy, where individuals are seen as having more agency, control over their own minds, increasingly control over their own actions, and then the idea that they should be free to decide their own religious beliefs, free to govern their own economic activities, and then increasingly politically free. And then corresponding with all of that philosophical and political movement toward individual freedom is the question of what we should do about educating people, particularly young people, so that they, in fact, can take charge of their economic lives, vote responsibly in democratic and republican institutions, make their own choices about whom to marry, think about difficult religious matters and make up their own minds, perhaps themselves becoming the next generation of scientists who are starting to discover all of these new tools and engineers and inventors and so on. So the idea of liberal education then was born, and it was fighting against all of the traditional authoritarians and traditional illiberals. But the idea here is that yes, we might know certain things to be true, but the important thing for the student is that the student has to see for himself and then increasingly herself why true things are true. And then on anything that's complicated, there's often a number of initial perspectives that seem reasonable, to be aware of what those are and what the arguments and counter arguments are. So the student has to be free to think for himself or herself about all of these issues. And then institutionally, professors have to teach in a way that encourages students to do so. Part of the liberal education ideal, though, was that no longer do we think that all of the truths have been handed down to us, that we want a next generation of teachers and professors also to be researchers and to be discovering new truths and doing new experiments. And again, for them to do that well, they have to have a certain amount of institutional freedom to be able to do so. So liberal education includes the professors, giving them academic freedom, sometimes giving them tenure, making sure that they are in departments in which there's a diversity of opinion on the controversial issues and the ones that are still being worked out. So that entire liberal education framework took hold in England in the 1600s, then in early America in the 1700s, and it had a really good run for a couple of centuries up until the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. And then internally, we've started to see a philosophical counter-revolution, a political counter-revolution, or at least a political ideological counter-revolution that basically doesn't believe in any part of that liberal education story. And so it's a new form of indoctrination that's been occurring. Now, what makes the connections important is if we then scale out, and this is the blog article that you're mentioning, to what's going on geopolitically, and then we say, well, who are the important world powers right now? And we can come up with the top 5, 6, or whatever your list are. But China is going to be on everyone's list. Russia is going to be on everyone's list. Maybe Islamism should be put on the list, given political Islam has been a force for the last 20, 25 years or so. But what is common, though, when you look at the educational frameworks in China, it is explicitly say that there is a doctrine. And on paper, it's a kind of neo-Marxism, so it makes obeisance to that. But they're quite willing to deviate from standard Marxist practice in lots of ways if they think that they will maintain control. So they have a kind of pragmatic authoritarian regime, but they control all of the educational system. It's a state-run, and quite explicitly
Mhm.
in the past year, especially, they've been stepping up and saying we need to stop being kind of as open as we were to foreign influences, say after the fall of the Soviet Union. we're going to, so to speak, crack down on, not just on Hong Kong and Taiwan at the political level, but that professors and students have been getting a little too out there from their perspective, and we have our doctrine, and we're going to be enforcing it more explicitly. So this is to put students and professors on board, but the range of free thought is going to be
Right.
narrowed in a kind of a pragmatic Marxist direction. I think is maybe the best label for China.
May I read from the statement just so
Yes,
that
go ahead.
people can hear
Sure.
what we're talking about? So translated, we have at the National Propaganda Ministers meeting held in 2024, it was proposed to effectively prevent and resolve ideological risks, develop and strengthen mainstream values, maintain public opinion and mainstream culture, to provide a strong ideological guarantee, powerful spiritual force, and favorable cultural conditions for comprehensively advancing the construction of a strong country and the great rejuvenation of the nation. Ideological work is about setting the direction for the country and instilling a soul to the nation. It goes on. But I read this and I hear echoes of DEI a little bit. Just in a different, obviously a different, you know, iteration of what they would consider to be mainstream values, mainstream public opinion, et cetera,
Mm,
dominant culture. But it's the same idea that this is the proper role of the government education system, is to do
yes.
these things. So I'm sorry,
Yes.
continue.
No, that's exactly right. And so you can say that as a generic authoritarian template, and then you just
Right,
plug in your particular ideology into that framework. And the Russians have their variation. Now, DEI, which is kind of the latest label for what we used to call political correctness,
right,
a generation ago, and then more abstractly, the postmodern framework, which is explicitly anti-modern, anti-liberal in philosophy and educational practice. Now, in the United States, the situation is a little bit different because we do have more diversity in higher education. We'll leave lower education for now. We do have a significant number of private universities, private colleges, and so on. At the same time, we do have the elephant in the room still is the public institutions, and those are administered in many cases by state level governments. So we do also have a federal government. It's not as weak as the state level governments are, but they have been largely captured or at least strongly influenced by now almost two generations of postmodernism, political correctness, wokeism, and then DEI is a more formal label. So where it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's not really about diversity or inclusion or equity in any reasonable definition of what
sure,
equity should be. So, but all of that's part of the propaganda labeling, and those are fighting words, of course, but we can come back to that as well. But again, what you have is there is now the idea that there is one value framework. And I say value framework a little bit more because it does say something about ethics, it does say something about politics as well. And the expectation is that professors will sign on to this one value framework as a condition of their courses being approved, as a condition sometimes of getting research grant. And then, more importantly, for people who are not yet professors but applying for professor jobs, you need to include I've signed on to this values framework to be considered for a job. Or if you are a junior professor, by which means someone who's got a professor job, but you're an assistant professor, you don't yet have tenure, you are very aware of what the political and administrative winds are saying. You have to sign on if you are going to have a chance of getting your position renewed and getting tenure. So we have a capture of the institutions by one ideological framework that is hostile to the idea of there being different frameworks that we are going to debate and discuss, and that's what the university is all about. So it's an attempt to impose a monolith. Now, this is happening both at the private institutions and at the public institutions. So there's an ideological framework that has come to the fore. Now, where it becomes more complicated is that there also are accrediting agencies that are nominally independent of the universities, and that's another kind of enforcement to the extent that they are captured by, again, one viewpoint that then guts any of the liberal education ethos out of their criteria for accrediting institutions. That's going to be another enforcement mechanism. And then, of course, in all of the public institutions, there's state level oversight and then federal government level oversight. And to the extent that those are captured as well, then you have a monolithic ideology that is going to run through the entire institution.
So, what has puzzled me is how little pushback we have seen from the academic uh, staff. So this seems to live at the administrative level. We have DEI departments, DEI officers, and then even within the academic departments, sometimes in some of the schools I've heard they'll have a DEI officer assigned to that department. So, if you're in the math department or the philosophy department, they'll have the DEI office in philosophy and so on. And yet I keep expecting, I guess, to see professors who certainly, I mean, it is possible, as you point out, that we now have, they've been sort of filtered through the political correctness of the last 25 or 30 years, but I still believe that there is a diversity of opinion even within that. And yet we don't see a lot of pushback. In fact, where we see the most action on the part of professors is for this. So the example I would give is the almost 700 members of faculty at Harvard who defended Claudine Gay. And then you have a whole group of professors at Columbia who are, defending themselves in spite of being openly anti-Semitic on campus and so on. So I see a lot of action coming from one particular political quarter or ideological quarter on campuses, but not as much. I mean, are they genuinely that afraid?
Mm,
Or is there something else in play?
yeah. So if we get analytic here, I think you're right to focus in the first part of your question on what's going on in administrative offices, HR offices, and various other offices devoted to various kinds of diversity and
Right.
so on. So one framework of this would be to say, what's going on with students, what's going on with faculty, what's going on with administrations, what's going on with accrediting agencies, what's going on with boards of trustees that all of the colleges and universities have, what's happening at state level into government, and what's happening at federal level government. So your question starts with the administration and the faculty, and those probably are two of the three most important ones to look at. I think administrations were captured to some extent. This is partly why we see DEI also in corporate culture as well as a strong force. So there's a strong, how are we going to administer the organization? We go back to our debates over affirmative action and with respect to races and ethnicities and so on. And all of those are just uh, imported into the new generation and given a new label, largely because the affirmative action was very popular inside universities starting in the 60s and 70s, but suffered a lot of defeats as it worked its way through the courts in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. So a lot of this is a repackaging. But nonetheless, the idea that we do not want to show in our statistics any racial imbalance, whatever the proportion in the population is, we want to show that we are not, say, racist by being able to publish statistics that show we have a proportional representation. And the same thing with respect to ethnicity, the same thing with respect to sex and gender. So all of that has carried over. And there is a kind of argument that says that's more important, even if we are not right totally postmodern and so forth. That's more important than paying attention to merit. Maybe we need to make up for the sins of sexism and racism in the past by having a kind of quota system, even if we will label it. So I think there have been many people in administration, in HR departments, and in faculty who are just sympathetic to that kind of argument. They're open to racial and gender quotas, but they're not wholeheartedly postmodernists. And so that gives them a seat at the table. It gives them a lot of traction. And it also, though, and this speaks to the third part of your question, why we are not hearing voices rising up in response more. I think a lot of people are not particularly interested in issues of racism and sexism. They don't see it as relevant to their departments. To the extent that they do start paying attention to those issues, they are immediately on the defensive, because it's very easy to accuse people of being a racist and being a sexist or whatever. And if you haven't thought about those issues, it's easy just to back away from it and let them have their way and do whatever it is they want. So it's easy then for the other side to become more institutionalized. Now, there is, though, in addition to that, though, a more overtly ideological component to it, where there are people who are hostile to, say, the American experiment, or broadly speaking, the British Enlightenment project, or Western civilization more broadly. And they have learned that if you want to attack your ideological enemy, you're always looking for weakness. And one of the soft spots has been racism, sexism, and so forth. That you're not really worried about racism and sexism, but you do know that this is a very powerful tool to put your enemies on the defensive. So they will, in the service of their ideology, use arguments about race and arguments about sex strategically as a way of undermining the institution and the ideology that they are opposed to.
Wouldn't that approach, though, only work in an environment or with people who truly are not racist and not sexist? I mean, in a liberal environment,
Yeah.
liberal small l, that if you say to somebody who wants to be a liberal person, you are being racist, or this is evidence of racism, they're more likely to respond either defensively or want to do whatever you prescribe should be done than somebody who actually is a racist or a sexist, who is more likely to say, so
Oh,
what?
that's right. No, that's exactly right. So those kinds of arguments only work, those moral arguments about racism and sexism, on people who take not being a racist and sexist seriously. Right.
Right.
There are lots of people, and I think this is why, all of the issues about racism and sexism and reparations for the bad treatment of women and racial minorities around the world, they have no traction in major parts of the world that are like the worst racist and sexist, because who cares? They say
Right.
you're a racist, and they say, yeah, so what, right? Right. So it
Exactly.
only works in countries where, no, we want to solve the problem of racism.
Right.
And maybe they don't have good conceptual tools and about how to deal with it, and they feel a little bit guilty about it. So in those cases, the arguments will have traction, and especially in higher education, they have had a lot of traction.
Yeah. Then that gives some weight to the argument, which I don't agree with as such, that liberalism caused the illiberalism, the repressive
Ah,
tolerance, the Marcusean kind of ideal that, were it not for our freedom of speech, we're hearing that now in a sort of backlash to a
yes.
lot of this. I'm hearing we had too much freedom of speech, even from the right. We'll hear, so, if you're talking about the political so-called polls, you'll hear from people that, freedom of speech should be curtailed because of hate speech and mean words and things, microaggressions. And then on the other side, you hear, well, when these bad people I don't like were allowed to propagate their ideas, then we ended up with this nonsense. And there's me somewhere in the middle saying, you're both wrong, but I'm not really sure how to explain it. So can you help us out?
Right. No. No, yeah, I think your instinct, so to speak, is right there. It's not quite that you're in the middle. It's more that you're like not on that spectrum. You're outside looking at
Yes,
them.
that's
Yeah, but
it.
no, you're exactly right to say that there is a backlash by another, right, ideological framework that has a long history, and is itself either in strong form not very liberal in the first place. It's in favor of a different kind of indoctrination, or it was kind of softly committed to liberal education as long as it had a seat at the table, and as long as the kind of liberalism wasn't too far from what. So here we're talking about mainstream conservatives and even stronger religious conservatives. Now, for the longest time, though, the strong religious conservatives have resisted the idea of liberal education as well. They lost the debates 2 or 3 centuries ago, but they've never been happy with it. But they've always been going along with it, largely because the liberals, the people by which I mean people committed to liberal education, have always had said, we want to have a diversity of opinion at the table. So we are going to talk about religion and politics and all of the different, and we're going to have professors who are representative of those positions as well. And of course, we have people on the left and the far left, because we do genuinely want to have diversity of opinion. So what though has happened though is that as in the first instance, starting in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the left was much more successful at capturing higher education, and then because of its illiberalism, getting rid of first the conservatives and the libertarians, and then even the middle of the road liberals, and so it becomes an orthodoxy. I would say it's the natural reaction of people who are not that deeply committed to liberalism in the first place to say, just as you were saying, well, see, we tried this liberal education, it doesn't work, so we just need to have our version of illiberal education enforced. And with as you see, this takes us into the issues in Florida and Texas at various attempts at reform, where what we are going to do is just use friendly politicians who happen to have power to enforce our particular ideology. And to the extent that you go down that road, then of course liberal education is dead.
Well,
Now,
do you think there? I'm so sorry.
yeah, let me just say one more point. So partly this, I think, works at the political level as just as a diagnosis, but the deeper issue is going to be a philosophical issue about reason, because liberal education, the whole idea of liberal education is that individual students who are coming to adulthood, they have a rational capacity, and that needs to be trained so they can use it well. And that requires that they be able to think about everything, including all of the controversial issues, the arguments for and against, and that we are going to trust that process of open debate and discussion, that most students, most of the time, are going to come up with the more reasonable position. And if you have that confidence, and only if you have that confidence in that philosophical position, will you then think that liberal education with its free speech is a viable project. So the reason, though, why the people on the postmodern left are opponents of liberal education is that they don't believe in reason in the first place. They believe that human beings, their minds are just constructed by their social environments, and that social environments are these adversarial, conflictual relationships and so forth. And so reason is a non-starter for them. And so the whole process for them of proper education has to be illiberal. It just has to be indoctrination on behalf of the viewpoints that they're in favor of. Now, at a level of abstraction, if you go to the other side of the spectrum, to the extent that a person is a conservative, especially a strongly religious conservative, those people also do not believe fundamentally in reason. Either just the strong form of conservatism will say, we are born into traditions, and who are we to question the wisdom of the ancients? Our job is to accept the traditions and propagate them. And that's then going to say that the traditions are the things that should be indoctrinated, and that's what you're going to push for. And if it's a more religious form, a serious faith comes first, you make a faith commitment, and maybe you will reason within the confines of your faith commitment, but not challenging the faith commitment itself. That also is going to mean that you're not committed to liberal education. You're going to be committed to a faith-based education. So it makes then sense epistemologically, or in terms of basic cognitive theory, that both the left and the right, because they don't believe in reason, for different reasons, will reject the reason upon which liberal education bases on. So it's not just a political debate, it's also an epistemological or a philosophical debate.
Right. I actually, at this point, see the former dictating the latter dictating the former. In other words, the philosophy comes first, and the politics of this are downstream of that.
Yes.
Because what I'm observing is a fundamental philosophical divide, even amongst the parents who come to me for help. I have to first ascertain what their philosophy of education is. So if they are, even as much as they might be complaining about gender theory or different things happening at the lower levels, if they do believe that the credentialing of their children for the purpose of getting a job is the purpose of education, and that it is the right and proper job of government to administer the education, all these things that are consistent with a more collectivist, utilitarian or pragmatic viewpoint, I have an uphill climb to relate to them or explain to them what I think is going on and what they need to do for their children, because we're not speaking the same language already. And at the higher education level, what I'm seeing is that same philosophical struggle play out when I speak to professors, when I speak to students. And I actually do speak to a fair amount of students, well, because I tutor college-bound seniors and they're doing their essays. And you can see the DEI in the essays. In other words, the Supreme Court said no more, and they put it in the essay questions. But the students don't understand, like, they don't get the philosophical question that's being put to them and are completely unaware that there is another option. So
Yeah.
they're so they've been in that progressive postmodernist collectivist world for so long that then when they choose their college, they're sort of sitting ducks for anybody who wants to grind that into them, right?
Yeah.
Either they're going to be apathetic about it, just sort of like, whatever, this is the dogma, I have to do it, or they go all in, depending
Yeah.
on what they're there for. But I guess what I would ask you is, if you, as a philosophy professor, what would you say is the dominant philosophy right now in the American college and university? And is that creating its own obstacle to restoring it to its original purpose of liberal education?
Yeah. There are two things in your comment there. One is that I think you nicely moved. We were talking about administrators, and then talking about professors, and then talking about politicians, and then we went to students and trying to get a bead on what's going on in the minds of, say,
Right.
late high school, early college level students. So one thing we can do is drill down into kind of the demographics and where the mental state of the students is. And then the follow-up question is, as those students are entering into a university, what is the dominant ideology of the university? So, which one would you like to take it
Well,
up?
let's start with the students. Let's start with that and set the stage, and then you can answer the other part.
Yeah, I think students are, I would say, in the last 10 years, starting to get better on that. And partly this is driven by economic considerations. I think the student debt crisis was a real crisis. And students of the last 10 years or so are more savvy about taking on economic debt in order to go to college. So they, probably also pressured by their parents, are taking a more serious look about what am I actually getting into if I'm going to go to college? Does it make sense, right, and so forth. So to the extent, though, that students are a little more critical in the last 10 years, they are starting to think in terms of cost benefit calculations. They're more likely to do a little more research about their university before signing in, and all of that is to the good. Just because, in part, they're not then just going to passively go to a university for more indoctrination. Some of them will say no and not go to university and avoid being indoctrinated, or they will go in with a more developed critical mindset, and that's a step in the right direction. The other thing that's really kicking in the last 10 years is there's a lot of experimenting in alternative delivery mechanisms for education. So, all of the online programs, all of the stuff that's happening at YouTube and Vimeo, and various hybrid programs. Some of them are more institutional, but we now have a whole generation of young people who are very well aware that there's just a huge amount of basically anything you want, you can find it online if you are curious about it. And correspondingly, more awareness among this generation of students that when they bump up to a controversial issue in class, if they're only hearing one viewpoint in their classroom, that they know they can go online and get lots of other viewpoints as well. So it is a kind of anarchy and chaos, and some of it's pretty messy out there in social media, but the students are aware of it and engaging with it for good and for ill. So I think more students then are in better condition precisely because of that. it may be that the demographic of students that you're more likely dealing with, the kind of student who is, say, being urged by parents, yes, you will finish high school, yes, you will go to college, yes, you will get a degree that will lead to a job, that already this is a student who has been, I don't want to overstate this, but has been conditioned, right?
Yes.
Or at least strongly nudged into a certain viewpoint about what education is. And
Yes.
to the extent that that student has not, say, rebelled the way, hopefully a healthy rebellion, and said, look, no, I want to make my own decisions here and explore my own path. To the extent that you have students who are just being, good children and doing what their teachers and parents, that might be a shrinking, that's probably too strong, but a smaller demographic than, say, a generation ago and certainly 2 generations ago. Now, we would need much better demographic survey numbers
Sure.
in order to make that judgment call. But from my perspective as a professor, I would say that what I have found is the students who are coming into my university have been more conditioned. There's less diversity of opinion in my incoming classes than there was when I started as a professor. And there also is less resilience, I would say, less emotional. I can handle various things, and more. This is a bit too strong, but more hand holding expected and needed, right, by the students. So I think that's to the bad. Now that though might be a function of my university, right, which is a good solid middle of the pack university, and I don't have a huge data set. But at the same time, we through my Center for Ethics and Entrepreneurship have been doing a lot of experimenting with different kinds of educational delivery, interviews and online lectures and this, that, and the other thing. So every week, I get from students in the United States and around the world several emails. I saw this video and I want to argue with you about it. Or I saw this email, this thing, where can I get more? Or so showing that there are, and I would not have gotten these emails 10, 20, 30 years ago when I was just starting out. So there is, I think, at the same time, another parallel informal educational process that's going on that a large number of students are engaging with. So I'm a little more optimistic about the students than I think a lot of my colleagues are. So the second question about dominant philosophy at the
Yeah.
universities,
So
or, or follow up.
if we were going to label it, if we were going to
Yeah.
say, American universities and colleges right now, the dominant culture, I mean, philosophy does kind of set your culture, is X. I mean, is it postmodern? Are we really going towards full-blown Marxism, neo-Marxism? Is it a blend? Like, what are we looking at in terms of the and I'm asking you to generalize, and I know that the administration might have one view and the professors might have a different view. If you go by department, like the science department's not going to be the same as the social science department.
Yeah.
I get that. I'm saying if you stepped out, 10,000-foot view, if you had to generalize, what would you say is the dominant philosophy above all the others?
I would say the dominant philosophy is still liberal education, but with a left tilt.
Okay.
And this is the flying at 35,000 feet, right above the terrain. And the reason for that is to say that when you choose to go to a university, it is still a choice. And when you choose to go to university, it's still a choice whether you're going to, say, be pre-med or pre-law or study history or biology. So you still have a huge number of choices. And within all of those majors, some of them are more scripted, some are not, but there are a large number of elective courses that one can choose. So I'm emphasizing the choose word because all of that is part and parcel of the liberal education ethos. It's not, by contrast, to say if you are going to university in communist China,
Right,
where
right.
everybody's taking the same courses and the same ideology, or in Soviet Russia, or in an Islamic madras, right, right? Where it's there's no choice, right? All down the road. So there still is a huge amount of choice, and even within that, especially at the larger institutions, there is still some diversity of opinion. Now, it might be, and all of the demographic shows this, that there is a leftward, and in some departments, a very strongly politically leftward tilt. But that is mostly in humanities and in the social sciences. You do find in med schools, law schools, business schools, much more diversity of opinion. Also, there's a student grapevine that students typically get plugged into pretty quickly. And I always recommend to students get plugged into it as soon as you possibly can. And they will talk quite frankly about which teachers are teaching, which ones are ideologues, which ones are bastards, to put it bluntly, which ones will downgrade you, which ones genuinely want you to think. So students are then able to avoid, to a significant extent, the professors who are not actually there to teach. So all of that said, there is still a huge institutional basis that I think is liberal education in the good sense. But it is ideologically slanted, and some disciplines are notoriously corrupted in that it's basically impossible to get a good education inside those.
Education being one of those.
Well, education departments
I'm sorry. I
yeah.
think that I went to graduate school of education at Penn, and
Yeah,
if I had to pick one particular discipline and one graduate department that is not just fully captured, but the root of a lot of this, it would be the
yeah,
graduate schools of education.
yes,
The pedagogical so-called research that they put out is furthering a lot of the ideas that then come back in a circle up to the university. Um,
yeah. Now,
so
so just and I think that's a good thing to do, to drill down from 35,000 feet to
yeah,
particular areas. So if we
sure.
focused on schools of education, I think you are right. At the same time, if we scale out a little bit, just looking at departments of education, and we go back, say, to the turn of the 20th century, it has been fair to say that basically every 15 to 20 years, the education schools go through a revolution where it's pragmatism and then progressivism, right? And then there's a resurgence of, we need to get back to hardcore science and technology after Sputnik, and then it's this kind of postmodernism. So
I'm
the
waiting.
education's, well,
I'm
they
so
have reinvented themselves. So it could very well be that we are, and I actually think this is probably true, at the tail end of one cycle of ideological faddishness. And this one has been worse, I think, than some of the other ones. But I don't want to say that just because we are there, that we are stuck there, and that's necessarily the course of the
I will
future.
try to be sustained for the rest of at least my day by your optimism. But, I unfortunately do not share it. I mean, I see the cycle. I do. I
Yes.
was there in 1989, 1990, and they handed me Paulo Freire, and we are still there. So,
Yeah.
I've so then given everything we've discussed, what do you think it would take, and I am asking you to be prescriptive, I'm sorry, but, what do you think it would take to restore
Well, I love being
academic
prescriptive.
academic and intellectual freedom in higher education? I mean, is this something that is, gotta be top down and bottom up? Can it be done only bottom up? I mean, what kinds of changes need to happen for us to restore this freedom?
Well, I think there will be a lot of experiments. So academic freedom is multifaceted. Right? So it's, academic freedom for students and the conduct of classrooms, and that is largely a prerogative of the professor. Do we have professors who are there to teach or to indoctrinate? So that's going to be one level of decision. Another is going to be at the level of the accrediting agencies. There's going to be political experiments, and there's going to be a lot of new institutions that are being formed. A lot of them have been formed. A lot of them are in formation right now that will explicitly dedicate themselves to liberal education in the proper sense. And then it will be a market thing, whether they can
Mhm.
attract enough students away from the other ones as well. So I think there will be 1,000 different experiments that go on, and all of that is good. And I think well enough of the youngest generation, they want to make something of their lives. They want to get an education. they will become more savvy consumers, and the better educational delivery systems will prevail. That said, all of that, and here's my philosopher prescriptive voice coming out, does depend on philosophy. That means we have to have a significant number of people committed philosophically to the idea that individuals matter, individuals thinking for themselves matter, individuals making their own life choices matter. And that's partly epistemological, that's partly ethical, that's partly political. So you put all of that together. Then, to the extent that we have that as a serious, I would say at least a small majority part of our culture, then the reforming will happen in lots of different ways that we started to talk about. Online new schools being created, and then universities starting to reform themselves from within after what hopefully will be a bad generation or so of dysfunctional experiments.
Right. Now, I do have a lot of parents in my audience, and so the last question I'll ask is on their behalf. When parents of school-age children, K through 12, so they're thinking ahead towards, what is this all for? And do I want to encourage my child to go to college, or do I want to just make sure I arrange their K-12 education such that they would be able to matriculate if they wanted to? In other words, it's not so free-form that they won't have the credits they need, et cetera. Um, I mentioned philosophy. You mentioned philosophy. They hear it, but they were not educated in philosophy, and they haven't really thought about what theirs is. As I told you a little earlier, they're thinking, isn't it for a job? And isn't it for that? So the thoughts are all over the place. What can you recommend to a typical parent of
Mm.
school age children to say, here's something you should read, or here's a video to watch, or something that can help you hone in on what your philosophy of parenting, of education, just what's like a good intro to this, so they don't feel like they have to suddenly go take a big philosophy class. I think people hear the word philosophy and they're instantly intimidated if they've never studied it. They think it's a really big word and scary, and it really isn't at all. But I don't know what to prescribe or what to say here. This is a great place to start to hone your thinking. What would you recommend?
Yeah, good question. And it will terminate in some reading recommendations or
Sure.
video watching recommendations. What I would say, though, is uh, for parents who have children in high school who are now young adults and they are about to go off to college, to the extent that you are still actively involved in your as a parent, and I think most parents are actively involved. Remember how you were in the lead up to your first child, even if you weren't particularly philosophical. Right? The standard thing is, and the mothers do this more than the fathers do, but you find out you are pregnant, right? And then the first thing you do is you go to the bookstore, you buy a big stack of books about children, right? And how to raise
Right.
children, and the psychology and the biology and the this and the that. And you give yourself a crash course on how to be the best parent you possibly can be. Now, whatever the modern form of going to the bookstore is, right? But the same thing happens with young parents right now, and they invest a huge amount of effort in thinking through all of the important things about raising a child. And a large part of that has to do with formal education. So what I would say is uh, rechannel some of that energy again before sending your kids off to college or sending them off to the broader workforce as well, making sure that they really are prepared for that. Now, what that will, of course, require is following some of the news. And I know millions of parents, they do this, right? What's going on in this crazy higher academic world. So everyone's aware of the Claudine Gay scandal and the University of Pennsylvania president who was fired, right? And the plagiarism scandals in DEI departments, and the president of Stanford also retired. So everybody is aware that there's a problem. Everybody's getting up to speed on these issues. And so that should be energizing when you think, okay, my kid is going to go to one of these colleges. What kind of education is he or she going to get? And spend some time doing what savvy consumers do, getting to know what that university is all about. So it's like you're buying a car, right? You look under the hood, you take it for a test drive. Do
Sure.
that with all of the universities and take that seriously. At the same time, be aware of all of the not all of it, but some of the experiments that are going on, and recognize that college, at least bricks and mortar college, is not for everyone. Some kids are going to have wonderful careers in the trades. Some of them are more naturally suited for entrepreneurship. Some of them are artists and musicians. And there are lots of post-secondary forms of education, formal and informal. So this is also a good liberal education point, that there is, at a very generic level, a one size fits all, but very quickly, every child is unique, and you need to customize education for the uniqueness of the child. So get up to speed and on what's going on at whatever institution, and make sure that you are customizing the education to the child, not expecting your child to be fitting into a kind of straitjacket model of education that
Right.
might not be right for that person.
Right.
What I typically like to recommend is Montessori. Even if you don't, agree with all of the details of Montessori, I see it as an open scientific pedagogy approach. But I do think that she got the philosophical fundamentals right about what education should be. And it's one of the things that's interesting to me is that if we take the general reputation of Montessori, again, it's a kind of liberal education, that you're training the student's mind to solve problems and to think creatively by giving the student lots of choices. But those choices are typically very hands-on with all of the manipulative. So it's a senses integrated with the mind, and it's a lot of physical activity instead of students just sitting in rows. There's a lot of individual choice, but there's a whole social ethic that's built into it as well. So if a parent is not familiar with that, say just read an introductory book by Maria Montessori, the Montessori method, or whatever, is a very good one. And then, as many parents and others do, think about how that can be extended past, K through 8 into high school and on into post-secondary education as well. It's always struck me as a very interesting phenomenon that when we, say Americans, I'm from Canada originally, but Westerners are now increasingly in global civilization. If you think about life from a more lowercase L perspective, we have this idea that we want people to be free, to live their own lives, to take charge of their own lives, to choose their own careers, to choose their own romantic partners,
Right.
to make their own choices in music and the arts, and to travel the world wherever interests them, and maybe to start their own careers and become entrepreneurs, so they're not, slave of the cubicle farm, right, so to speak. Right.
Right.
So we have this ideal of a free life, and we want to prepare students for that kind of life. But then if we think also, before we send children to formal school, say from age 0 to age 5, before they go off to kindergarten, how we educate, so to speak, our children. What we do is, we put them in a nurturing environment. We provide them with as many resources as we possibly can. We don't force feed them things. Instead, we typically put a number of different toys out, and we see
All
which
right.
one the child is interested in. So the child chooses this toy and explores it and learns some things for as long as the child is interested, then puts it down and moves on to the next thing. And maybe the parent will facilitate, but you're emphasizing the children making choice and learning for themselves. Right? So we do that for 5 years, but then we do everything different as soon as we send the kid to school.
Yes.
First grade, sit there, right? And sit there for 45 minutes and listen to the teacher, right?
Right.
Who is this authority figure who has all of the answers? And no experiments, and you better not fail the test. So the atmosphere is entirely different. The social structure is entirely different.
Hmm.
Somehow we think that if we make the kids sit in this kind of environment, I mean, you'd have to ask permission to go to the bathroom, for example,
Right.
right, for 12 years.
Right.
That education is going to prepare students to go off to live this free entrepreneurial, travel the world,
Right.
musically enriching life. It's not going to do it. So, what I would say is, to the extent that you have bought into that model of education, the current K-12 model, start to think what what the alternatives might be, and certainly don't just sign your kid up for 4 more years of it at university. Look at universities where there's lots of choice, where at least the debates over political correctness and DEI are being engaged. There's active efforts to reform by the administration, by the donors, and so forth, and work with your kid to find the right placement.
Right. And I think what's interesting is that in the past, let's say 30 years or so, they've figured out how to change the cosmetic setup of the class. So we have, chairs, round tables, and we have things that don't look like rows, and it doesn't look arbitrary. Lots of
Mm,
group work, lots of, choose your project. But in the end, not only is the ideology one and fixed, and you must
mm,
agree with these precepts, these ideas, and don't challenge the teacher, you're going to probably get in trouble. But also the choices the child is asked to make are are the ones they don't want to make. So they
mm.
want to be able to go to the bathroom when they have to go to the bathroom. They don't want to have to choose, for example, to share their emotions with the class. Pick an emotion and share it with the class. Like, I don't want to do that. That's not a choice I want to make. So they're asking them to make choices that were never on their list of choices that they wanted to make publicly or even in a school setting. And then they're saying, don't make choices about these other things. It become very confusing as far as where are my personal boundaries and you talked about agency. So I think a lot of parents see this sort of cosmetic changes and say, oh, it doesn't look like what Dr. Hicks is talking about anymore. And you're like, yeah, it doesn't look like that, but still like that.
Sure, that's right. That's right.
So
So there
anyway,
are, yes, there are 40 big decisions that go in, and you can change 10 of them, but still have essentially an indoctrination kind of education. That's
same
true.
thing. Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
I am very grateful that you came and shared these answers to my questions with us because it actually gives me a little more hope than I had before we sat down. If you are seeing enough to give you this level of optimism that all of this constructive chaos is going to work out in our favor, then I'll go there with you.
Yeah. Well, look, we're a very rich society, and we're very generous when it comes to education. So we've got huge amounts of resources available for education. We know enough about entrepreneurship and experimentalism. That's part of our culture. So we know,
Right.
that works in science, it works in art, it works in all sorts of fields and so forth. So let's just, say, actually, we can do that in education too. Right?
Right. Just keep on doing it, and I mean,
Yeah,
it's
that's
actually it's the advice I give to parents when they say, "How do I fix the system?" And I'm like, You don't. That's not even your project. Your project is to fix your home, fix your environment for your child, and
right.
then that means that you have to interact with parts of the system, okay, but you can only fix what you can fix,
That's right.
and I think too many people think it's their responsibility to go out and fix the whole or make it change, make it different, and it's not likely to happen. So anyway, well, thank you very much. Where can people, aside from at stephenhicks.org, what else can people do to follow you, find you?
Well,
More?
our own contributions to educational experimenting are at the CEE video channel at YouTube. So
Okay.
we've got lectures and discussions and modules of all different sorts. Most of it is in the areas of philosophy and ethics, especially business ethics and entrepreneurship. So I would,
Wonderful.
but a lot of it's about philosophy of education. So CEE video channel would also be high on the list.
Fantastic. Well, I will put that all in the description for this video. And I thank you very much for spending time with us today and hope you'll come back again in the future to share more of your thoughts as you have them. Always feel free to reach out if you have something you want to tell people. Otherwise, I'm
All
like,
right.
hi, can you come talk to us?
All right.
Anyway, thank
Real
you so
pleasure, Deb.
much.
Yeah, we'll plan on it. Okay.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.